Have you ever watched a film you have never seen and felt like you already knew what would happen? Not the plot twists, but something deeper. The mentor who appears when the hero is lost. The descent into darkness before transformation. The threshold that must be crossed alone. You recognize these patterns before they unfold, as if you have lived them in another life. Carl Jung spent decades investigating this exact phenomenon. Why do we recognize stories we have never heard? Why do ancient myths from cultures that never contacted each other tell virtually identical tales? Jung discovered something that shook the foundations of psychology. Beneath your personal memories, beneath everything you have learned and experienced, there exists another layer, a deeper architecture, an inherited dimension of mind that you share with every human who has ever lived. This is not mysticism. This is the collective unconscious, and it changes everything about who you think you are. Jung understood that consciousness has layers. Most of what psychology studied was the personal unconscious, your repressed memories, forgotten experiences, the specific traumas and joys unique to your individual life. But Jung discovered something deeper, something that had never been in your consciousness because you did not create it, you inherited it. Jung described this as the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. Think of consciousness as an iceberg. The visible tip above water is your conscious awareness. Just below the surface lies your personal unconscious, everything you have experienced but forgotten or repressed. But beneath that, extending into unfathomable depths, exists a foundation you share with all humanity, the collective unconscious. This ancient bedrock was never learned. It was never taught to you. You were born with it, just as you were born with a beating heart. Jung insisted this was not mystical speculation but empirical observation. He watched it emerge in thousands of dreams from patients who had no knowledge of mythology, yet they spontaneously produced symbols identical to ancient civilizations. He saw it in the art of cultures separated by oceans and millennia, expressing the same fundamental patterns. How do you explain this? Jung realized these contents are inherited the same way biological instincts are inherited. You see, a bird does not learn to build a nest by reading instructions. The pattern is built into its nervous system. The knowledge is inborn. Jung discovered that humans inherit psychological patterns the same way. We are born carrying templates, blueprints, universal structures that shape how we perceive and experience reality. These are not vague tendencies. They are specific, recognizable, powerful forms that operate beneath awareness, structuring your relationships, your struggles, your journey toward meaning. Jung called these inherited patterns archetypes, and they are the language of the collective unconscious. The question that emerges is unavoidable. What exactly are these universal patterns, and how are they shaping your life right now? Jung defined archetypes as innate blueprints, pre-existent forms that structure human perception before you consciously think. He called them the inborn mode of psychic apprehension. This is not abstract philosophy. This is about how your mind actually works. Archetypes are psychological organs, as real and functional as your eyes or your lungs. They give definite form to certain psychic contents, Jung explained. They are the molds through which raw experience gets shaped into recognizable meaning. But here is what makes archetypes so powerful. You do not create them. You discover them already operating within you. Jung observed that these patterns can only become conscious secondarily, meaning they work beneath awareness, shaping how you see mentors, challenges, enemies, and transformations before you consciously register what is happening. You project these templates onto the world automatically, unconsciously, inevitably. Jung recognized that there are as many archetypes as there are typical situations in life. Wherever humans face recurring existential experiences, birth, death, the search for meaning, the encounter with evil, the need for nurturing, the journey toward wholeness, and archetype structures how that experience unfolds psychologically. Think of archetypes as constellation patterns. The stars exist independently, but the pattern, the form that connects them into recognizable shape, is the archetype. Different cultures see different images in the same stars, but certain patterns emerge universally because they correspond to fundamental human experiences. Jung compared archetypes directly to instincts, and this comparison reveals everything. Just as you have an instinctive fight or flight response you did not learn, you have instinctive psychological responses to archetypal situations. When you encounter a wise teacher, the wise old man archetype activates. When you face your hidden shame, the shadow emerges. When you begin a transformative journey, the hero pattern structures your experience. You are not consciously choosing these responses. They are activated by situations that match the ancient template. This is psychological inheritance operating in real time. The collective unconscious is not a metaphor. It is the inherited dimension of your psyche, filled with these universal blueprints, shaping your inner life, whether you acknowledge them or not. Jung dedicated his life to mapping these patterns, identifying the specific archetypal figures that appear universally across cultures and throughout history. Which raises the question, what are these figures? What patterns did Jung discover appearing again and again in myths, dreams, and the human psyche across all cultures and all times? Quick question in the comments, what's one life rule you've been following that you're starting to question? Jung became the cartographer of the collective unconscious, mapping the archetypal figures that populate the depths of every human psyche. He did not invent these patterns. He observed them emerging spontaneously in clinical work, cross-cultural mythology, religious symbolism, and his own visionary experiences documented in the Red Book. What he discovered was a cast of universal characters, each representing fundamental psychological dynamics. The hero archetype embodies the drive toward growth and transformation. Jung recognized this pattern in every culture's myths, the individual called to leave the familiar, face trials, descend into darkness, and return transformed. From Hercules battling impossible labors to Luke Skywalker confronting his shadow in Darth Vader, the hero follows the same essential journey. This is not coincidence. The pattern exists in the collective unconscious as the psychological template for individuation, for becoming whole. The Great Mother represents the archetypal feminine in both nurturing and devouring aspects. Jung saw her in the earth goddesses, who give life, and the dark mothers who consume. She is Demeter and Kali, the Madonna and the witch. This archetype structures how you experience nurturing, dependency, safety, and the terror of being consumed or controlled. Every human emerges from a mother, and that primordial experience activates this ancient template. Then there is the shadow Jung's crucial discovery of the repressed dark side of personality. Where there is light, there must also be shadow, Jung wrote. The shadow contains everything you have denied about yourself. Your anger, your selfishness, your capacity for cruelty, your forbidden desires. It appears in myths as the adversary, the dark twin, the monster in the depths. You project it onto enemies and scapegoats rather than recognize it within. But Jung insisted that integrating the shadow, consciously acknowledging your darkness, is essential for psychological wholeness. The trickster disrupts order and breaks boundaries. This archetype appears as Loki in Norse mythology, Anansi in West African tales, Coyote in indigenous American stories, the chaos agent who operates outside rules, creating both destruction and unexpected transformation. The trickster energy in your psyche resists rigid control, undermines your seriousness, reveals the absurdity beneath your certainties. Jung also identified the self as the archetype of wholeness and totality, the anima and animus as the contrasexual aspects of psyche, the wise old man as the archetype of meaning and guidance, the divine child as the potential for renewal. Each appears universally because each corresponds to fundamental dimensions of psychological experience. These are not abstract concepts Jung theorized about. These are patterns he documented appearing spontaneously across cultures, eras, and individual psyches in the dreams of Swiss housewives and Mesopotamian myths, in modern films and medieval alchemy. The archetypes are not arbitrary categories. They are the actual structures operating in the collective unconscious, shaping how you perceive mentors, face challenges, understand your darkness, and move toward wholeness. But if these patterns are truly universal and truly inherited, where do we actually encounter them? Where is the evidence that Jung discovered something real? Jung insisted that myths are the real exponents of the collective unconscious. He saw mythology as direct projection of archetypal patterns, not consciously invented stories, but spontaneous expressions of the deep psyche. The whole of mythology could be taken as a sort of projection of these inherited structures, Jung wrote, and the evidence is staggering. Consider Jung's detailed analysis of the sun hero myth. Across Egyptian, Norse, Greek, and countless other mythologies that never contacted each other, the same story appears: the divine hero born from the sea each dawn, battling through darkness, dying at sunset, and being reborn the next morning. Jung recognized this was not cultural diffusion. These cultures developed the myth independently. The pattern emerged from the collective unconscious itself, from the archetypal template of death, struggle, and rebirth stamped into human psychology. This is how Jung worked. He studied myths from civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, and documented identical patterns appearing spontaneously. The flood myth appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in Noah's Ark, in indigenous Australian Dreamtime stories cultures, with no historical contact, telling the same tale of destruction and renewal. Jung interpreted this as the cleansing, rebirth archetype emerging independently from the collective unconscious. He saw the wise old man archetype appear universally as Merlin, as Gandalf, as Obi-Wan Kenobi, as the Buddhist guru, the aged mentor who appears when the hero is lost, offering guidance toward transformation. He recognized the hero's journey in Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece, and in modern narratives like Harry Potter and The Matrix, the chosen one called from ordinary life, facing trials, descending into darkness, returning with hard-won wisdom. Jung's methodology was meticulous. He analyzed thousands of dreams from patients who had no knowledge of mythology, alchemy, or comparative religion. Yet these ordinary people spontaneously produced symbols identical to ancient Gnostic texts, medieval alchemical drawings, Hindu mandalas. How do you explain a Swiss factory worker dreaming of symbols that match 2,000-year-old alchemical manuscripts he has never seen? Jung explained it through the collective unconscious, the inherited layer, producing the same archetypal images across time and culture. Even modern popular culture validates Jung's discovery. Star Wars draws unconsciously from the hero archetype, the shadow in Darth Vader, the wise old man in Yoda. Marvel narratives recycle ancient god myths. Every chosen one story is the hero archetype reactivated. These patterns persist not because screenwriters study Jung, but because they tap into something genuinely universal, the archetypal templates operating in creator and audience alike. Jung did not speculate. He documented what he observed consistently appearing in myths, dreams, art, religious symbolism, and the spontaneous productions of the psyche across cultures and centuries. The collective unconscious is not theory. It is observable pattern, empirical evidence that beneath personal consciousness lies an inherited dimension we all share. Which brings us to the essential question: what does this mean for you? What changes when you understand that your mind contains not just your personal history, but the spiritual heritage of all humanity? Jung knew this discovery sounds mystical. He acknowledged the resistance, but he countered that assuming a collective unconscious is no more daring than to assume there are instincts. You accept without question that you inherited biological instincts. Why resist the reality that you also inherited psychological patterns? When you recognize an archetype operating in your life, everything shifts. That attraction to a nurturing figure is not random. The mother archetype is activating. That rebellious impulse disrupting your carefully controlled life is not weakness. Trickster energy is emerging. That anger and shame you work so hard to hide is not proof you are broken. It is your shadow demanding integration. You are not inventing these patterns. You are discovering them already shaping your experience. Jung described the collective unconscious as a second psychic system of a collective, universal, and impersonal nature, which is identical in all individuals. This is profound. It means you are not isolated. Beneath your unique personal history, you share psychological ground with every human being. Your struggles are not random individual failures. They are your particular expression of timeless human patterns. The hero's descent into darkness, the confrontation with the shadow, the search for the self, these are ancient journeys. You are walking in contemporary form. This awareness offers both perspective and agency. Perspective. When you recognize you are living an archetypal pattern, you gain distance from the story. You are not just suffering random chaos. You are moving through a structure humans have navigated for millennia. Agency. When you understand which archetype is active, you can consciously engage with it rather than being unconsciously driven by it. You can choose to face your shadow rather than project it. You can recognize the hero's journey rather than be blindly swept through it. You are not just an isolated self. You are a participant in a long lineage of minds, Jung wrote, carrying the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution. Every dream symbol, every mythic recognition, every moment you feel connected to something larger than your individual story, you are touching the collective unconscious. You are experiencing what Jung spent his life proving, that we are simultaneously unique individuals and expressions of timeless patterns, contemporary and ancient, personal and universal. Jung insisted this is neither speculative nor mystical, but an empirical matter. He observed it, he documented it, he mapped it. The collective unconscious is real, operating whether you acknowledge it or not. But when you do acknowledge it, when you study archetypes in myths, art, dreams, and your own psychological patterns, you gain insight into both your inner life and your shared humanity. The collective unconscious contains, in Jung's words, the ancient stories living in our souls. You carry within you not just your personal memories, but the accumulated wisdom, the universal patterns, the archetypal dramas that have structured human consciousness since consciousness began. You are a unique individual, and you are an expression of something timeless. Both are true. Both are you. Understanding this changes how you see yourself, your struggles, your journey. You are not broken. You are not random. You are walking paths carved deep into the human psyche, carrying patterns older than civilization, participating in a collective inheritance that connects you to every human who has ever lived or ever will. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who thinks deeply about these patterns. What's one insight from this that you're going to sit with? Share below.